Fame can shape legends, but it cannot protect the bodies behind the music. For these 10 iconic voices, liver failure crept in quietly, hidden beneath stage lights and applause. They kept performing, kept dreaming, even as their strength faded one day at a time. Tonight, we look beyond the fame to uncover the final battles they carried alone, battles no spotlight ever revealed. Number 1. Lou Reed. Lou Reed spent a lifetime reshaping the sound of modern rock, a musician whose intensity and raw honesty helped define entire generations. Yet during his final year, behind the calmness he showed the world, his body was engaged in a long, quiet struggle that few truly understood. After decades of living at the center of New York's relentless art and music scene, his liver had slowly deteriorated to the point where a transplant became his last chance at survival. The operation early in 2013 brought a brief surge of hope. He walked again, practiced Tai Chi, met friends, and even spoke about future projects with the steady determination that had carried him through his career. But deep beneath that fragile recovery, complications were slowly returning, undoing the small victories the surgery had offered. As the summer faded, his strength slipped away more noticeably. He stopped appearing publicly, spent more time resting, and tried to shield those around him from the full weight of his decline. Even so, he continued to think about music, analyzing sound, reflecting on old sessions, and planning ideas he knew he might never complete. Those who visited him during those weeks were struck by the contrast. His body weakened by disease, yet his mind still sharp, still chasing creative clarity. By October, his liver could no longer support him. The exhaustion became constant, and the calm acceptance on his face revealed that he understood what was coming. On the morning of October 27th, he stepped outside and performed Tai Chi for the final time. The movements were slow, controlled, almost ceremonial. An artist leaving the world in the same spirit of discipline and introspection that had guided his entire life. He passed away shortly after, surrounded by a sense of tranquility that stood in stark contrast to the turbulent brilliance of his career. His death sent shockwaves through the music world, not only because a legend was gone, but because it exposed how long he had carried this illness in silence. Even icons who seem unbreakable to the world face battles that unfold quietly, day after day, far from the stage lights that once made them feel invincible. Number 2. Ray Charles. Ray Charles had lived a life so vast, so influential, that his voice became part of America's musical foundation. Yet in the months leading up to June 10, 2004, the man who once commanded stages across the world was quietly fighting an illness that grew stronger every day. His liver had been failing slowly, almost invisibly, draining his strength long before the public realized how fragile he had become. He continued attending medical appointments, reviewing treatments, and trying to work on personal projects at home. But each week, the exhaustion pressed harder on him, silencing the energy that once seemed limitless. By early 2004, those closest to him noticed undeniable changes. He moved more slowly, rested more often, and spent long afternoons sitting with close friends instead of rehearsing or recording. Doctors monitored his liver function, offering what relief they could, but made it clear that he had reached a stage where recovery was no longer realistic. Even so, Ray remained calm. He listened to music constantly, tapping his fingers gently along the arm of his chair, keeping time with rhythms he could no longer perform on stage. His conversations drifted toward memories, old tours, treasured friendships, and the moments that defined his extraordinary career. As spring turned to summer, his world grew quieter. Public appearances stopped entirely, replaced by peaceful hours surrounded by soft music and familiar faces. He asked often about new artists, still hungry to understand how the world of sound was evolving, even as his own body weakened. On the morning of June 10th, He was surrounded by people he trusted, resting in a room filled with calm and warmth. When he passed, the loss rippled across the nation. Radio stations played his songs for days. Fans gathered outside his home, and musicians everywhere spoke of how deeply he had shaped their lives. Ray Charles's battle with liver disease revealed a truth few had known while he lived. Even the strongest performers, the architects of entire musical eras, can be overtaken by a quiet, relentless decline hidden behind the glow of their legacy. His final months were marked not by fear, but by reflection, grace, and a profound acceptance that his time was coming to an end. Yet his voice, and the emotional world it carried, remains immortal. Number 3. Jack Bruce. Jack Bruce had shaped the very heartbeat of classic rock. His voice, his bass lines, his fire, these became the sound of an era. But behind the legacy people celebrated, he spent years quietly battling a liver condition far more complicated than most fans ever knew. Between the lingering effects of liver cancer and the difficult treatments that followed, his health declined slowly, almost invisibly, until the fatigue became a constant weight he could no longer ignore. By the time 2014 arrived, the illness had taken so much from him that even short walks left him breathless. He spent much of that year at home, surrounded by notebooks, instruments, and old recordings. Music remained the anchor of his days, though he no longer had the strength to bring new ideas to life. Friends who visited spoke of a man still sharp in mind, still capable of discussing tone, harmony, and the stories behind legendary sessions. Yet they also saw the signs of a body that was losing its fight: slower movements, long pauses, and a quiet acknowledgement that time was slipping away. Doctors focused on keeping him comfortable, explaining gently that the damage inside his liver could not be undone. By late summer, Jack grew noticeably weaker. He rested often, speaking less, choosing instead to listen to the early recordings from his years with Cream. Those songs, raw, electric, timeless, seemed to reconnect him with moments when his creativity felt limitless. Memories of crowded venues, sleepless tours, and fierce improvisations flashed across his mind like pieces of a life that had moved too fast to fully grasp. His family recalled how he smiled softly during these moments, as if the music itself eased the fear of what was coming. On October 25, 2014, his home was quiet. Morning light filtered through the windows, and the house carried a calm that felt almost sacred. Surrounded by loved ones, he slipped into a gentle rest, leaving behind a world forever changed by the sound he helped create. News of his passing spread instantly. Musicians across genres released tributes, fans wrote messages about the first time they heard his voice, and the industry paused to acknowledge a giant whose influence reached far beyond his lifetime. Jack Bruce's battle with liver disease was slow, unforgiving, and hidden from the public eye. But even as his body weakened, the spirit that shaped generations of rock musicians never left him. His final months were filled with reflection, with music, and with the quiet dignity of a man who understood both the weight of his legacy and the fragility of the body behind it. Number 4. David Cassidy. David Cassidy had once been one of the brightest faces in American pop rock, a voice that filled concert halls and television screens with youthful energy. But by 2017, long before most fans realized it, his body had been quietly losing a long battle with liver disease. The illness had chipped away at his strength for years, draining him slowly, reshaping his life one limitation at a time. Friends noticed the change first: how quickly he tired after rehearsals, how he struggled through long interviews, how his once electric presence dimmed between performances. He tried to keep going, insisting he could push through the exhaustion, but his body was already slipping beyond recovery. In the early months of 2017, the decline became unmistakable. Cassidy appeared increasingly frail on stage, missing notes he once hit effortlessly, and pausing between songs to gather his breath. He later canceled appearances, explaining he needed time to rest, though few understood how severe the situation truly was. Behind closed doors, he confided that his strength was fading far faster than he could publicly admit. Medical evaluations confirmed his fears. His liver function had dropped sharply, and even with treatment, the damage had already reached a critical stage. His world grew smaller as he focused on staying comfortable, surrounding himself with familiar music and memories that once defined his life. As autumn approached, David spent more time at home with family, reflecting on the chaos and glory of a career that had accidentally turned him into a global superstar. He listened to old recordings, sometimes smiling at the youthful voice that had carried him to fame so quickly in the 1970s. Those who visited him described moments filled with nostalgia, soft conversations about tours, fans, and songs that had once felt timeless. Despite his exhaustion, he remained gentle, grateful, and clear-eyed about what was coming next. When he was admitted to the hospital in November, specialists tried everything to stabilize him. But liver failure had already taken hold, leaving little room for a miracle. On November 21, 2017, surrounded by quiet voices and warm hands, David Cassidy slipped away. The news spread instantly, and tributes poured in from fans who had grown up with his music, as well as younger generations who discovered him through his influence on pop culture. His death revealed a truth hidden behind years of fading public appearances. An artist who had given so much of himself to the world finally succumbed to the long, relentless decline that chronic liver disease brings. His final months reflected courage, vulnerability, and the bittersweet weight of remembering a life lived under the brightest lights. His voice may have softened in his final years, but his legacy remains unshakable. Number 5. Percy Sledge. Percy Sledge, the soulful voice behind When a Man Loves a Woman, carried a sound so emotional and timeless that it became part of the fabric of American music. But long before the world learned he had passed away in April 2015, his body had been quietly fighting a slow, unforgiving battle with liver cancer. He chose to keep most of that struggle private, spending his later years away from the spotlight he once commanded so effortlessly. As the illness progressed, fatigue settled into every part of his life. Even simple conversations left him winded, and the warm smile that once lit up rooms grew softer as his strength faded. In early 2015, those closest to him saw the toll more clearly than ever. His movements were slower, his voice quieter, and he spent long hours resting in silence. He canceled appearances, something deeply out of character for a man who loved performing even in his older age. Doctors monitored his liver function, offering treatment that brought temporary comfort but could not stop the damage growing deep inside his body. Sledge accepted their words with calm realism, choosing to spend his days surrounded by family rather than in hospitals. Music remained a constant presence. He often listened to his old recordings, humming faintly along to melodies that once soared with effortless power. As weeks passed, the decline became more pronounced. He ate less, spoke less, and devoted his limited energy to moments that mattered most. Friends described gentle scenes, Percy sitting quietly with headphones on, eyes closed, revisiting memories of smoky studios, heartfelt performances, and the raw emotion he poured into every note he ever sang. Despite the exhaustion, he remained warm and grateful, acknowledging the loved ones who stayed by his side. By April, his family sensed the final chapter approaching. The home grew quiet and tender, filled with soft music and familiar faces. On April 14, 2015, Percy Sledge passed away peacefully in Baton Rouge. The news sparked an outpouring of tributes from artists across genres, all recognizing the depth of emotion he brought into the world. His death revealed a truth hidden behind the gentle smile and powerful voice, that chronic illness had been slowly claiming his body long before the public knew. His final months were shaped by reflection, love, and the quiet dignity of a man who had given his heart to music for decades. And though liver cancer weakened his body, the voice he left behind remains immortal. Number 6. Gerry Rafferty. Gerry Rafferty's voice had drifted through radios and city streets for decades, carried by songs that seemed to belong to everyone who ever felt lost or longing. But by the time 2010 turned into 2011, the creator of Baker Street was facing a private battle far heavier than the world ever knew. Liver failure had been tightening its grip on him for months, draining his strength piece by piece, until performing, traveling, and even extended conversations became nearly impossible. Friends noticed the changes first, how he paused often to catch his breath, how he moved with careful steps, how his once bright energy flickered beneath the weight of illness. Despite it all, Gerry kept a quiet grace, accepting the slow decline with a mixture of realism and reflective calm. Throughout the final year of his life, Rafferty spent most days at home in Dorset, surrounded by the familiar comforts that had always anchored him. Soft light through the windows, stacks of records, notebooks filled with musical sketches, and memories of a career that had shaped entire corners of rock and folk. He listened to old sessions often, closing his eyes as if revisiting the long nights in the studio when his creativity felt endless. Friends who visited him described conversations marked by introspection, Gerry reflecting on the impact of his music, the whirlwind years on the road, the unexpected immortality of melodies he had once written in silence. His voice remained thoughtful, but his body grew noticeably weaker, and simple walks became rare, replaced by hours spent resting in a nearby chair. As autumn approached, the signs of advanced liver failure intensified. He tired after only a few minutes of talking, his breath shallow, his movements slower than ever before. Caregivers focused on keeping him comfortable, knowing the damage inside his liver could no longer be reversed. Yet even in the quiet of his final months, Gerry found moments of peace, watching the landscape outside his window, listening to early mixes of his music, or simply sitting in silence as memories washed over him. Those closest to him described an atmosphere of acceptance, a calm surrender to the passage of time from a man who had lived both the storms and the stillness of fame. By the final days of December, Gerry required constant care. His strength faded almost completely, and he drifted between long periods of sleep and brief moments of awareness. On January 4, 2011, he passed away in his sleep, leaving behind a legacy etched into music history. News of his death brought a wave of tributes from listeners and musicians who had been shaped by his sound, melodies that carried longing, melancholy, and truth. His story revealed how chronic illness can steal quietly, unnoticed by the public, until its final chapter arrives. And though liver failure claimed his body, the emotional depth of his music continues to echo, untouched by the passage of time. Number 7. Steve Harwell. Steve Harwell, the unmistakable voice behind Smash Mouth, spent years shaping the sound of late 90s and early 2000s pop rock. His songs were everywhere, on radio, in films, in stadiums, and his energetic stage presence made him feel larger than life. Yet behind that brightness, his body had been struggling for a long time. Liver failure does not arrive suddenly. It creeps in quietly, chipping away at strength, balance, and energy long before anyone sees the full picture. By early 2023, those closest to him could no longer ignore the signs. Severe fatigue, difficulty standing for long periods, long stretches of weakness, and a slow, unsteady gait that revealed just how fragile he had become. As the months passed, Harwell withdrew from the public eye. The man who once owned the stage now spent most days resting at home, supported by family and a small circle of friends who understood the seriousness of his condition. Medical evaluations revealed that his liver had reached an advanced stage of failure, so advanced that even aggressive interventions offered little hope of recovery. He struggled to eat, struggled to sleep, struggled to maintain the routines that had once been second nature during life on the road. Yet despite the decline, he still listened to music often, revisiting the songs that had defined his career. Those close to him described moments of nostalgia, quiet reflections on the whirlwind years of unexpected fame, hit singles, and crowds shouting lyrics he never expected would become cultural staples. By midsummer, his condition had worsened sharply. His speech slowed, his energy dropped to nearly nothing, and he spent most hours resting in a dim, quiet room. He spoke softly when he could, offering brief smiles or nods during moments of clarity. Memories of studio sessions and tours surfaced in these moments, lightning flashes of the life he once lived. As August ended, specialists recommended hospice care. It was a decision that acknowledged what everyone already knew: his body was no longer able to fight. Family and lifelong friends surrounded him, creating an atmosphere of calm, warmth, and gentle conversation. On September 4, 2023, Steve Harwell passed away peacefully at home in Boise. When news broke, tributes poured in across social media and the music world. Fans remembered him not only for the songs that defined summers, childhoods, and movie soundtracks, but also for the optimism and personality he carried into every performance. His final months exposed the deep toll of advanced liver disease. Not sudden, but slow and relentless, pulling him away from the spotlight long before the world noticed. Though his body failed, his voice lives on, echoing through playlists and memories as brightly as it did in his greatest years on stage. Number 8. Amy Winehouse. Amy Winehouse was a once-in-a-generation voice, raw, unfiltered, unmistakably human. But by 2011, behind the fame and the headlines, her body had been fighting a slow, devastating decline that few outside her inner circle truly understood. Chronic liver disease had been eroding her strength for years, quietly amplifying every moment of exhaustion, every tremor, every day she needed more rest than the day before. People saw the public struggles, but not the deeper reality. Her liver had been pushed past the point of recovery long before the final crisis arrived. During the early months of 2011, the change became impossible to ignore. She grew thinner, paler, and more fragile, moving with a stiffness that spoke louder than any headline ever could. Friends who visited her described days where she barely touched her food, where her hands shook, and where her once fiery presence softened into long stretches of silence. Doctors warned her repeatedly that her liver was failing and that her body needed time to heal, time away from pressure, away from chaos, away from anything that could push her already damaged organ closer to collapse. She understood, but the battle inside her was larger than any schedule or recovery plan. Spring brought glimmers of hope. Some days she seemed stronger, laughing, talking, even humming along to her own songs. She attempted rehabilitation more than once, and for short moments it looked like she might find her footing again. But liver disease is unforgiving. The damage inside her body was already too deep, and the periods of improvement never lasted long. She returned home, where caregivers watched over her closely. She spent long afternoons listening to Back to Black, eyes closed, connecting to a version of herself she could no longer physically match. Even in her most fragile moments, her love for music remained one of the last lights that didn't fade. By early July, her illness had advanced to its most dangerous stage. She moved slowly, spoke softly, and often seemed lost in waves of exhaustion she could no longer hide. On July 23, 2011, she was found unresponsive in her London home. Emergency crews arrived within minutes, but her body, already weakened by years of chronic liver damage, could not recover from the final shock placed upon it. News of her death spread instantly across the world. Tributes filled the airwaves, memorials formed overnight, and millions mourned a voice that seemed almost too powerful to be silenced. Amy Winehouse's final months revealed a painful truth hidden behind the brilliance of her talent. Chronic liver disease had been taken from her quietly, piece by piece, long before the world understood what was happening. Her voice remains eternal, echoing through every song she left behind, while the body that carried it simply could not endure the damage she faced in silence. Number 9. Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday's voice reshaped American music, pouring pain, elegance, and truth into every note she ever sang. Yet by 1959, long before most fans realized it, her body was collapsing under the weight of advanced cirrhosis, liver damage that had been building quietly for years. She had carried the burden in silence, performing through exhaustion, touring through pain, and pushing forward even as her liver struggled to keep her alive. By early that year, the changes were undeniable. She moved slowly, her skin pale, her breath short, her once commanding presence reduced to fragile steps and whispered conversations. Even simple tasks drained her, revealing how deeply the illness had taken hold. Friends and nurses recalled that she often clutched her abdomen in pain, needing to rest after even the smallest effort. Yet despite the suffering, her mind remained sharp. She spoke about her music, about the musicians she admired, and about the long journey that had taken her from Harlem clubs to legendary stages. As spring unfolded, her appetite faded and her weight dropped dramatically. She spent long hours lying still, drifting between moments of clarity and long stretches of sleep. Those closest to her described a haunting contrast, her voice in recordings still soaring with power, while the woman behind it was fading away, trapped in a body that could no longer support her spirit. When she was admitted to the hospital in May, doctors knew her liver had reached its final stage. It could no longer filter toxins, leaving her confused, fatigued, and increasingly dependent on medical care. Visitors described the room as dim and quiet, filled with soft light and the faint hum of medical equipment. Billie often hummed fragments of melodies, even when her voice had weakened to a whisper, as though music was the last part of herself she refused to let go. Nurses remembered moments when she opened her eyes and spoke softly about old performances, about smoky jazz rooms, and about the emotions she poured into every song. In her final weeks, she drifted deeper into exhaustion, speaking little and resting almost constantly. On July 17, 1959, Billie Holiday passed away, leaving behind a legacy so powerful that it continues to influence singers generations after her voice fell silent. When the news broke, tributes from across the world spoke of her courage, her artistry, and the heartbreak hidden beneath her brilliance. Her death revealed the toll that years of illness had taken, an invisible struggle masked behind the timeless strength of her music. Though liver disease ultimately claimed her body, the emotional truth she carried in her voice remains immortal. Number 10. Townes Van Zandt. Townes Van Zandt was a poet disguised as a songwriter, a man whose lyrics carved straight into the heart of American folk. But by 1996, long before the world knew he was nearing the end, his body had already been worn down by years of chronic liver disease. The decline was gradual at first, fatigue that no rest could fix, weight loss that seemed unstoppable, hands that trembled when he tried to play even the simplest chords. Friends sensed the shift immediately. The once sharp glance in his eyes softened into a tired haze, and the man who once wandered through life with quiet intensity now moved with a fragility impossible to hide. By mid-year, the symptoms of end-stage liver failure became painfully clear. He grew unsteady on his feet, relying on others to help him walk short distances. His voice, which had once carried entire universes in a whisper, had thinned into something strained and delicate. He spent long afternoons sitting with his guitar resting across his lap, gently brushing the strings even when he didn't have the strength to sing. Music had always been his anchor, and even as his body weakened, he clung to it with an almost sacred devotion. Friends described him as both present and distant, physically fading, spiritually reflective, quietly aware that his time was running out. As autumn faded into winter, his condition worsened sharply. Liver failure filled his bloodstream with toxins his body could no longer filter, leaving him confused, exhausted, and drifting in and out of awareness. Family members arranged constant care, filling his room with soft lighting, familiar objects, and the quiet presence of people who loved him. There were moments when he recognized faces, nodding gently or offering a faint smile, but these moments became fewer as the days passed. His final weeks unfolded in near silence. The man who once wrote with such brutal emotional clarity, now communicating mostly through whispers, gestures, or simply through the stillness of his gaze. On January 1, 1997, Townes Van Zandt passed away in his home, leaving behind a legacy that would only grow larger after his death. When the news spread, tributes came from musicians who had learned how to be honest in their writing because of him. Artists whose own work existed only because Townes had shown what vulnerability in music truly sounded like. His final months revealed the quiet devastation of chronic liver disease, stripping away his strength long before the world realized what was happening. But even as his body faded, the truth he put into his songs remained untouched. Townes left this world in physical frailty, but his words, the raw, unshakable truth of them, still stand tall.